We want to thank our members, volunteers, and interns for making these forums possible since the population of China first reached 1 billion in 1983. The ICFRC hosts community programs such as this to address topics of international interest. I want to acknowledge our community and university supporters, the University of Iowa's international programs and the University of Iowa's honors program. They contribute vital time, talent, and logistics to our organization. I also want to thank special financial supporters, the Stanley UI Foundation, and today's special sponsors, Heidi Gaylor and Bridget and Adam Ingersoll. Also thanks to City Channel 4 for professionally recording our programs for cablecast on City Channel 4 or 118-2 in the UI Library's digital archives. Please be sure to like City Channel 4 on Facebook. Although we are getting going a little earlier, the format will be the same as always. Following the speakers' presentations at about 1 o'clock, we will have a 15-minute Q&A period. There are cards on your tables, and the interns will collect them and bring them up at the conclusion of the speaker's remarks. Please silence any cell phones and any other electronic or digital devices. If you do leave early, we ask that you do so without disturbing others. And so, again, we've got Detective Dave Gonzalez, Detective Andy Rich, Johnson County Attorney Janet Lyness, and Assistant Johnson County Liz Dupuich. And giving you a little bit more information on them, Janet's been the county attorney since 2006. She clerked for the 7th Judicial District prior to that, and she also worked as an assistant Johnson County attorney for many years. Liz is the lead prosecutor for the Johnson County Drug Treatment Court and does the majority of the operating while intoxicated, the drunk driving cases, so to speak, in Johnson County. She previously worked in the LA County District Attorney's Office and as a Deputy Attorney General for the California Department of Justice. Detective Dave Gonzalez has been with the Iowa City PD for 21 years, and he's been assigned to investigations for 16 of his 21 years. Dave is currently a board member with the Iowa Death Investigators Association. Detective Andy Rich has been with the Iowa City Police Department for 13 years and has been assigned to investigations for 5 years. Andy has worked cases involving sex crimes, financial crimes, violent crimes, crimes against children, as well as death investigations. He, like Dave Gonzalez, is a board member of the Iowa Death Investigators Association. So, without further introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Janet Lyness.
Thank you. This indeed was a very unique investigation and prosecution of this case, and we're delighted to tell you about it. As you can see, here's the 4 of us, and try to get this. This was a really interesting experience because working with people you don't know from another culture who speak another language and then realizing that you're all working together for justice is a really good feeling. And I think that that's how we all left. We didn't necessarily start out that way, but we ended up having the conclusion that we really were all on the same team working for justice with the Chinese. I want to let you know that it wasn't just the Iowa City Police Department and the Johnson County Attorney's Office. The Ames Police Department was very involved, as was the Division of Criminal Investigation. So we had investigators from the Ames Police Department, a lot of different special agents from the DCI, working with the Iowa City Police Department and the Johnson County Attorney's Office to conduct the investigation. So as you can see, multiple departments working together for truth and justice. So like that. The Tong Shao investigation began on September 17th, and the way we're going to divide up this presentation is we're going to have Detective Gonzalez and Andy Rich tell you more about the investigation. I'll tell you a little bit about coordinating with the Chinese about the actual work with them to get them to come here and persuading them to actually investigate and pursue this case in China, and then ultimately having Liz Dupuich talk about the trial that these 3 got to attend in China and actually watch the proceedings there. So I'm going to turn it over at this time, though, to Detective Gonzalez to talk about the investigation.
First off, let me thank everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm really happy to share some of this information with you. I've gotten asked quite a bit to at least talk about this investigation. This investigation, of all my years in investigations, this one was obviously very, very different in many aspects. Logistics, again, very, very different in so many different places. What we'll do is we'll start with a little bit about the investigation. I just want to apologize in advance. I know we kind of have some short times. This investigation took about a year and a half or so we're going to try to cram all that in about an hour. So I apologize. I'll probably speak a little bit quickly. Again, we'll answer any questions that you have at the end here. I do want to point out Dr. Nishelsky, who's back over here. He also assisted with this investigation as well. And obviously, we're very, very lucky to have Dr. Nishelsky with us as well. Again, we'll go through this real quick, but if we have any questions towards the end, obviously feel free. And I just want to apologize in advance. We'll go kind of quickly with this. So I remember this night very, very clearly that I would get the call. Andy and I would head out to the scene to look at this case, and this is it right here. So. Of course, we get the best equipment to get out there and do what we need to do. It took us a little while to get out there with this horse because we ran out of quarters, but obviously we made it. We got there and we started our work. So we'll start off with a short video. This will cover some of the things that we're going to discuss and talk about here. Is there sound?
Oh, can we get sound?
This short video from CNN, it would basically cover, with I think it was like a 5-minute video, but it would basically cover the investigation from start to finish, kind of where we started on the investigation and then kind of where we finished on. Obviously, we're going to go through some of that anyway. I do appreciate CNN's input on this because what happened, we got to a point in the investigation where CNN kind of get involved into it by talking to the family in China. Obviously, that was one of our biggest obstacles, is to try to get overseas, to try to keep that communication going. CNN was involved in this, and once that happened, we started getting a lot of cooperation from the Chinese government to try to move this thing a little bit further. So we'll talk a little bit about Tong Shao. She lived in Ames, Iowa. She was a student at the University of Iowa. She was working on an undergraduate degree in engineering. She was here in the U.S. for an education visa. She was a Chinese national. She's the only child to her mother and father back in China. Junior in college, 20 years old, when she was murdered. So basically, this report actually comes in from the Ames Police Department as a missing report. Now, I think it's important to basically say and point out, by the time the police were involved in this as a missing report, when it got reported to the Ames Police Department, which we'll find out later, but Tong Shao's boyfriend was already back in China. So we already got kind of a late start to this investigation. And this is kind of basically how it happened here. So back on the 17th, of September in 2014, a report was given to the Ames Police Department, a missing persons report. The last contact that anybody had with her was back on the 8th of September. Basically, her roommates, she had 3 roommates, they received text messages from Mr. Li's phone, which is her boyfriend's phone, saying that, hey, I'm gonna go visit some friends up in Minnesota. Don't worry about me, I'll be back in a week. Basically what he did is he bought himself a week there so that way he could basically leave the country before we'd even know that she was basically missing. That got filed, and so like I said, we kind of got a late start into that. He also texted some friends, Mr. Li, which we'll talk about in a second, but he texted some friends that he was headed back to China for a family emergency. This is Mr. Li here. He lived here in Iowa City. He was a student here at the University of Iowa. He was just getting ready to jump into his master's, I believe, master's degree. Mr. Shao and Miss Li actually met, or Miss Shao and Mr. Li actually met in an English class before coming over to the U.S. So we talked to the roommates. The roommates actually provided some pretty good information about who they contacted, the last time they contacted. They also kind of said that she was quiet. She kind of kept to herself. The roommates were also able to provide Mr. Li's name as the person that she is currently dating. So that's kind of to start the investigation, pointing towards Mr. Li at that point. We did locate an address of Mr. Li, like again here in Iowa City. Ames Police Department came down and they actually performed a search warrant at this address regarding the missing person case. That's what kind of kicked off the whole missing persons investigation. That's what kind of got Iowa City involved in the investigation as well. Here's just a current photograph of the apartment that Mr. Li was staying. So again, we got together with Ames Police Department, and basically what we did is to basically fall backwards and try to figure out where her current location is. We started to send a lot of subpoenas out, bank records, tracking credit card information, that type of stuff, to see where she possibly could be at that point. During the course of that investigation, we talked to one of persons that we identified, which would be a very, very important witness for us. He goes by Paul. He lives up in Minnesota. Detective Rich and I went up to Minnesota to interview him. He basically relayed information that he got a phone call from Mr. Li back on the 6th of September, that he would confirm a flight, a one-way ticket for Mr. Li back to China. So just remember that day. It'll be important as we go backwards. So basically on the 6th, he confirmed that there was a flight leaving Cedar Rapids Airport to Chicago, to Shanghai, to Guangzhou. We also know that Mr. Li took a taxi from his current apartment in Iowa City to Cedar Rapids, and we would follow up with those records as well to confirm that. We also know that there was a flight change at some point. We don't know why the flight change happened at the time, but there was a flight change. Instead of basically flying out of Chicago straight to Shanghai, he would change his flight from Chicago to LA and then LA to China. He also provided us information about a possible vehicle that Ms. Xiao would actually operate. And this is where the vehicle basically comes into play here. The license plate number you see here is out of Kentucky, which is the last one. So we started a search for that vehicle, basically trying to track that vehicle down. We did find that vehicle right outside Mr. Li's address. I think it was 2 or 3 buildings next to his building, apartment building, but this is the vehicle as it sat in the parking lot that evening. We also interviewed another subject who was also kind of dating Ms. Xiao, or kind of seeing her, or at least friends with her. He would provide some pretty interesting information as well, but we knew that she maybe had a new boyfriend at this time now. And of course, we'll kind of remember that as we progress through this investigation. Mr. Li had a phone conversation back on the 3rd of September 2014 with a friend from the University of Michigan, saying that he was sad because he had found out that Ms. Xiao was now talking to other boys. Again, just on that last slide, we started talking about Mr. Yan, who is also starting to see Ms. Xiao at this point. This friend who lives in Michigan would WeChat, which is almost like a texting app, to Mr. Li saying, hey, how are things going with you and your girlfriend at this point? He responds back on the 10th of September, everything's fine at this point. At that point, he is actually in China. Of course, we go back up to Michigan. We interview that witness, and she does confirm that Mr. Li called her on the 3rd of September. He was upset with an issue with Ms. Xiao. According to her testimony that she would provide to us, Mr. Li had called Xiao, and she must have accidentally answered her phone call. During this phone call, which lasted approximately 30 minutes, he heard a conversation that Ms. Xiao was actually talking to another boy. During that conversation, she was actually talking bad about him, saying a lot of bad things. Well, at least he would interpret those things as being bad about him, that she was telling this new male subject. Once Detective Rich and I went up to Michigan to interview her, she would report all these things to us at that point. Now we're starting to think, okay, things are kind of getting bad here. We have someone who may be upset with her because she does have maybe a new interest. And so we started to look at this a little bit harder at this point, thinking maybe he was upset to the point where he could have done at least something to her. So we go back to the apartment. We apply for a search warrant. We go into the apartment at that point. While in the apartment, like I said, here's an outside shot of it again, but there's some things that we're going to find and look at. Obviously, the apartment was kind of left in this position here. A lot of clothes spewing around. There was some female clothes that we believe belonged to Ms. Xiao. There were suitcases there as well. And you're going to see here, which is kind of interesting, but there was actually, it looks like he just had gone grocery shopping, but none of the groceries were actually put away. There's some milk on the counter there that was kind of spoiled at this point. So obviously to us right off the bat, it just kind of looked like someone was in a very, very hurry to try to get some stuff and kind of go out. Again, there was a couple suitcases here. Bedroom with some financial documents. So those documents that would recover in that room would give us certain credit card information to allow us to better track Mr. Li's travels. Then we started pulling some phone calls, some phone records. Once we got some phone numbers, we started to download a lot of these phones. What we get is a list of numbers, and we have to track where each one of those numbers goes to. Well, during that time is kind of when we learned about this cab company. And then, of course, that would lead us to many other witnesses during the course of this investigation. Here's the cab receipt basically saying that, hey, I took a cab from Iowa City to Cedar Rapids, and you can check the time there. It's pretty early time. He leaves in the morning there to catch his flight out. The total cost was $38. The mileage is $25. So it gives us a lot of information about when he took the cab and where he went, how much he actually paid, which was a lot of times a cab driver's not going to remember that, but it would tell us based off of the fare if there were one or two people in that cab at the time. And since the fare was $38, that was a standard fee for a single person traveling to Cedar Rapids Airport. Again, we would use those phone records and the cell towers. Now, since we have her phone number, what we would do is we would use the towers around there. Anytime your phone's turned on, it's going to reach to a tower. Anytime it reaches out to a tower, we can pull that information to kind of track the whereabouts in this particular case if we have a reason to do so. But you can kind of see it on this one, basically. We just have a historical GPS data that kind of told us, hey, where's the phone at this time and kind of what's going on at this time. So based off of the last slide you saw where the GPS was hitting it, what it was pointing to is a hotel that was located in Nevada, Iowa. So we go to the hotel based off of that information, and we go ahead and pull a receipt from the hotel room. This is a copy of the receipt that we have, so we know they actually stayed in the hotel room. Obviously, we don't know who stayed in it, but we know the credit card came back to Mr. Li. So now we go back to talk to the clerk, continue the investigation where we kind of learn, okay, and then they in fact did stay there. They stayed there as a couple. They kind of give us the check-in dates and check-out dates. So we know for a fact that they checked in to the Budget Inn on the 5th of September 2014. They were supposed to check out on the 7th of September, which would be kind of a long weekend. When we talked to the clerk, there was no checkout. So by the time the 7th rolled around at noon, they go into the room anyway, and there was nobody there, so no one actually checked out there. However, in speaking to the staff there, we did find a vehicle matching that Toyota Camry that we spoke about earlier, that we saw photographed earlier. We saw someone reported seeing that vehicle in the parking lot during these dates. Let me back up just 1 second here. Another room this is the actual room they stayed in, which was 218. This is important because when we go into the room, we do a search warrant on the room at this point. What we want to make sure is we photograph everything. And like I said, the guys that we assigned to do this, they did a really good job. And you can see they kind of photographed a towel there with a tag on it. Now that will be very important later on in the investigation, and that's why we do it. We have no idea what we're going to photograph or what we need by going into a room. So as not to make a mistake, we're going to photograph everything that's in there just to make sure. And then later on, if we need it, at least we've got photos of everything there. In this particular case, this is going to hold true based off of that tag that you see there. At this point, we do some follow-up interviews again because we still have not been able to locate her. Now, what we're going to try to do is we're going to go back to Miss Shao's apartment. We're going to pull hairbrushes, toothbrushes, anything we can get a hold of that would yield possible DNA, her DNA. Maybe we can track it through that in that regard at this point. Like again, everything that's happening that you see here is just a missing persons report at this point. We're just trying to basically locate her and see if check on her welfare. Now, this will all change here on this 26th of September 2014. So you remember the time that he's talking about when he was upset, and this happened back on the 3rd of September. It is now the 26th of September. The 26th of September, the gold Camry is now recovered outside of Mr. Li's apartment. Obviously, once we found the vehicle, right off the bat, what we do is we go ahead and lock the vehicle down. We'll get the necessary paperwork from the court with the help of our county attorney's office. And we'll start to process that scene. And I can tell you right now, the responding officers when located the vehicle could smell what they believe to be a decomposing body. And that smell is pretty significant. So what we did is we got the necessary paperwork, we locked it down, and then obviously we went ahead and opened up the vehicle, took some photographs, kind of see what the vehicle contained. At this point, there was a badly decomposed body in the suitcase within the trunk of this vehicle here. at that point, basically the homicide investigation will now switch over from a missing persons report. Now we've got a homicide investigation at this point. I had a chance to meet with, we would kind of leave the vehicle there at that point. We'll kind of come up with a plan of attack. We have multiple areas because of the bodies contained in the vehicle. We needed to come up with a plan about how we want to handle that, since we've got the crime scene itself, which is actually the vehicle. We've got the trunk that's also there, but we also have a suitcase, and within the suitcase we have a body. So what we did is we brought in Janet's office. Dr. Nishelski was there for this meeting as well, because we needed the pathologist, the ME's office, obviously, and we needed to kind of come together how we wanted to handle that. Do we want to take the whole vehicle, or do we want to take the suitcase out and then the body out and then examine the vehicle for any type of physical evidence and then turn it over for biological evidence? So that's kind of what we're talking about and how we wanted to kind of go with this. Again, this is kind of the way it's set up right here. We'll set up some lights. We'll start doing the examination of the vehicle, photographs. So basically, the final autopsy, again, would come out at this point after we were able to process this vehicle. And we can just kind of read real quick here, but obviously the body was found in a suitcase within the trunk. There was a laceration to the facial skin, absence of a couple of teeth in the front here, no visible injuries to the skull or the brain, moderate decomposition with abundant insect activity. The insects would be important as well. We'll collect the insects as well, and we'll send that off as well to kind of see the stages of insect growth, which might yield a better time of death as we're doing the investigation itself. And then, of course, the manner of death in this particular case would be homicide, the cause of death, asphyxia. So we would use those things as we push through this investigation here. What we discovered during the autopsy, again, this is going to be kind of, but this will be very valuable. We want to know, how is the body packaged? So within the suitcase, the body was placed into the suitcase, and along with the body, there were a hand weight, some materials, a lack of clothing on the body, and then, of course, we needed to do the identification of the body at this point just to prove who it is, in fact, that we're dealing with here. So again, the towel that was contained within the suitcase with the body, again, you guys can see the label there. If you guys remember back to the original slides from the hotel, this label would match what the hotel uses and the type of towels they use. Now, with a grain of salt, you got to kind of think they're probably not the only hotel that uses this type of towel, but it's just one other piece of a block that we would kind of stack as we go through this investigation here. Here's a better picture of the towel. You can see the discoloration of the towel, but the towel is supposed to be white, so it kind of gives you an idea of the decomposition of the body at that point. Here's one of the hand weights that was contained within the suitcase, along with the body. Now, as we start to go through the investigation, of course, many questions come up, and one of the things that kind of came up during this is, why were there hand weights in that suitcase? So we're trying to answer and come up with answers to these types of questions of why we would package a hand weight there. What we're able to do is to get a positive ID by taking and you can see this as well, a thumbprint here, and using that thumbprint to get a positive ID of who this is in the trunk. Basically, this is just a report saying, okay, we were able to remove that, and the prints do match the known prints of Miss Xiao. It would give us the visa application numbers. It would give us all of her information that we can then pull and start going on doing what we call victimology at that point, kind of going backwards and seeing, okay, who is she, where's she from, to start the investigation a little bit further. It also gives a positive idea of who we're dealing with in that point as well. Here's the fingerprints, the actual fingerprints that we actually got from Miss Xiao as well, to be able to compare that thumbprint to. Just in case that failed, we always kind of have a backup plan. We also requested dental records from her family. We were able to get those dental records sent to Iowa and to our department specifically. If she had any dental work done here in Iowa, or if she was seen here in Iowa, at least we have that to compare with as well if we couldn't do the print. This is the report. They talked about that when we collect the insects as well, and they kind of go through this report. I think it's important to do that. It kind of gives us a better date. Obviously, our date range in this particular case, we already knew from the 3rd of September until the body was found the 26th. So we're kind of looking at that. Now, we can backtrack a little bit because of the decomposition of the body a little bit. We were just seeing if we can't narrow it down a little bit more using the insects that were contained within and around the body at that point. It didn't really yield anything a little bit better, but it just said anywhere from like the 10th to the 18th of September is when the death may have occurred. So we know this for sure. What we learned is Li tells a friend that he just called Tong Shao, and she answered her phone by accident. He heard her talking badly about him to another friend. She was last seen alive at a study group at ISU on the 6th of September. She tells her friends that weekend that, hey, I'm going to go spend time with my boyfriend. They already knew who her boyfriend was. Tong Shao and Li checked into the Budget Inn in Tucson, Nevada on the 6th of September. We're supposed to check out on the 7th of September. We know, and this is kind of what we're believing here, we're going to go kind of quickly here, but on the 6th to 7th of September, Li kills Shao and tries to dump her body in the Skunk River. And now I'm going to tell you this, and we'll kind of go backwards a little bit, and I apologize, but I think it's important to get this out so I can explain why we did what we did. And then on the 8th through the 10th, Li flies to China, and of course, at that point, he actually hides in Tibet, which we didn't actually know about until much later. But he does run, and he hides in Tibet. The 17th, Shao was reported missing to the Ames Police Department by her roommates. She was already missing by the 7th of September, but it never got reported to the Ames Police Department until the 17th of September because he had made that phone call, buying himself enough time to get out of the country. So no one was really looking for her because they thought she was with friends up in Minnesota. On the 26th of September, we find her body in the Toyota Camry next to Mr. Li's apartment. So at this point, it's safe to say that Mr. Li is a person of interest for our department. During the course of the investigation, I can tell you right now that it would be a premeditated murder. There was a lot of things that would happen during the course of the time. Since he got the phone call on the 3rd that he heard that, hey, she might have somebody else who was speaking illy of him. When we go through this a little bit further too, you're going to kind of see that she does go to a study group. And after Mr. Li drops her off of the study group, where she's still alive, he then will go to TJ Maxx, to Walmart, and he's going to go ahead and buy the suitcase at TJ Maxx. Right after leaving TJ Maxx, he goes over to Walmart where he's going to buy the hand weights. And then based off of the phone records, these particular records that we're going to go as we track them, and let me back up a little bit. So as we pull his phone records, we start to see little places he's hitting on. Those little arrows you've seen right here that they're pointing at, it's going to be the TJ Maxx, it's going to be the hotel, and it's going to be Walmart. So we're going to go backtrack and look at all those places for possible video. As we pull that video, we start to learn that, hey, you know, Mr. Li walks in. This is a Casey's right here, but he walks into a Casey's here. And this is, in the next side here, you're going to see here, he's at TJ Maxx, and he's looking at suitcases. If you can see it over here on the right side of the screen, you're looking there. This is Mr. Li at the checkout as he's bringing the suitcase up to the checkout here. This is him paying for that suitcase. Here's the vehicle that he's actually operating the day that he actually purchased the suitcase. Now Mr. Li here is at Walmart. You can see him doing a self-checkout here. The defendant purchased a one-way ticket to China on the September, and then shortly thereafter, after the ticket, he goes ahead and kills what we believe he killed her in the hotel, or at least tried to kill her in the hotel. And then September 8th, he flees to China. Now, again, he's already in China by the time we ever get the phone call of a missing persons case at this point. But you go back to the premeditation aspect of it, and he is working on that to try to get out of here. He's already set things in motion. He's bought the suitcase, the hand weights. He's already been to the hotel. He's already told a friend that, hey, she's made me upset because I know she's talking bad about me with another boyfriend. Here again is the manifest from the flight. We actually pulled that as well, so it kind of gives us the information about where he actually went and how he got there and when he got there as well. Again, this is the second half of the flight. And then we're going to go through a possible, again, we wanted to know why he had the weight in there. So we're going to use the phone again. This is a map of what the phone actually showed. So Mr. Li, in the early morning hours, when he left that hotel room on the 7th of September, he would drive by the Skunk River in 2 different locations. So basically what that told us at the time is that's why he had the hand weights in the suitcase. He prepared to, not only did he kill her, but then he prepared to actually to submerge the suitcase so the body wouldn't be found. Now, I don't know why he didn't do it at the time, but Detective Rich and I would later go out and visit these sites. And as we go out there at the time, the river was receding. It had receded so much that there was a pretty good sandbar that you would have to walk up to the edge of the water to dump the suitcase. And when everybody sees that, automatically you're thinking, well, it's not deep enough. So the suitcase never made it out of the trunk. It stayed in the trunk. But that's why he actually went there, is to check those things out here. Here's a better image and a satellite view of kind of what we're talking about here. And then basically after all that, along with Janet's office, we start working with that and we start presenting our case and facts to Janet. And then we go ahead and apply for a first-degree murder warrant that had a $2 million bond, which is actually still active today, that Janet would to help us with. So he does have a warrant for the United States for murder in the first degree. But anyways, you turn it over to Janet.
So at this point, we have a warrant for his arrest, for Mr. Li's arrest for murdering Tong Shao, but we believe he's in China. We don't know where he is. And so at this point, we start trying to figure out what we're going to do. So we initially, then, I filed for authorization for extradition. And what that is basically where I'm asking any other law enforcement agent, if they find him, pick him up, we want him back, and we'll pay to bring him back, and we'll make arrangements to get him brought back to Iowa. One other thing, too, we didn't really know where Tong Shao had died, whether she died in Nevada, whether he killed her in the motel room and took her out and then brought her here to Iowa City, if she was still alive when he put her in this suitcase and she died after she got here from asphyxiation. We weren't really sure. So I worked with the Story County Attorney and convinced him that we wanted to prosecute it here, and he agreed reluctantly, but we said we wanted to prosecute it here because we knew she was dead in Johnson County because we found her here. And we have, county attorneys have authorization to prosecute anywhere in the state of Iowa, although generally we're just going to prosecute where we are elected and where we are the county attorney, but we are allowed to prosecute a case here if it has some ties to Johnson County. So we proceeded with the extradition. This is the actual, which you can't read there, but it's the authorization where I just give my formal approval to have her extradited from another location. So other law enforcement agents will start looking for, the U.S. Marshals will assist, things like that. Extradition, though, only works if we can find the person in the United States or in another country where we have a treaty with them. So we work with the United States Attorney's Office because we had believed that he had left the country and gone back to China. There had been no indication he had come back into the United States, and we were able to verify that he had not come back into the United States. But we didn't know really where he was. Is he still in China? His friends there, his family there, we were hearing from his friends that he wasn't back with his family. They didn't know of any family emergency that had led him to go there. So we started trying to figure out, well, if we have an extradition treaty with another country, they will also assist us in trying to locate and help us bring back somebody from another country that we want to prosecute in the United States. Unfortunately, we do not have an extradition treaty with China. So here we are with a warrant for his arrest. We know the last place that he went to, at least, was China. But what do? We don't have an extradition treaty. So worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office again, and they got us in contact with who I call my hero, Frances Chang. Frances works for the Department of Justice. You can see she's a trial attorney with the Office of International Affairs in their criminal division. And she had worked on a couple of other cases in the west part of the United States where they had been trying to have somebody prosecuted domestically in China, didn't know if it would work. She said, but, you know, I kept on saying, isn't there some way we can convince them to send him back here? Isn't there some way we can get him to extradite him back? And she was like, nope, not going to work. So I kept on trying that, but she was like, no, it's not going to work, Janet. It really isn't. So the next thing we did then is kind of talk to her about what about having them prosecute him domestically. And there is a provision under Chinese law, which is under Article 7 and 232 of the People's Republic of China's criminal law, that Chinese citizens may be prosecuted for murder committed outside of the territory of the People's Republic of China. And so under Article 3, they have that the public security organs or the people's procuratoriates shall, upon discovering facts of crimes or criminal suspects, file the cases for investigation within the scope of their jurisdiction. So it authorizes them to actually look at prosecuting somebody who commits murder outside of China. However, this has not really been done very much. So Frances knew of a couple of cases that have been worked on the West Coast, weren't really sure that they would be interested in looking in this. They'd never really done it before, but it was worth a try. I mean, we're stuck. We have a woman who's been murdered in Iowa. We aren't going to just let it drop. We want to make sure that she has justice, that we really can make him be held accountable. Plus, if he's going to do it to her, is he going to commit another murder of somebody else? We really feel like we have that deterrent responsibility to stop other people or stop people from committing other crimes too. So if we can stop him and hold him accountable, we're helping. So as I said, this had only happened a couple of times before that Frances Chang knew of even working on cases, and they weren't quite like this. But we went ahead and decided to try it. So I formally wrote a letter to the Chinese government and asked them to investigate and prosecute Xiangnan Li. And somebody can maybe tell me how to say his name correctly, but Mr. Li. I sent it to the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Washington, D.C. It had to include the cases of the facts of the case and the Chinese citizenship of the victim as well as the perpetrator. Here's the actual letter. You can see, you can't really see it, so never mind, we'll go on. I actually had to resend the letter because I didn't have the specific language I needed to have in it, so I had to resend it, and it took us a little bit longer. Their big concern that they had was that this is a very circumstantial case. I mean, we think it's a great case, but it's circumstantial. There's no witness, there's no confession. And for them, it was kind of like, what's the clear motive? This was her, she's his girlfriend. He's her boyfriend. It's not like they were fighting over money or there was some other real explanation about drugs or something like that. So we had to write the letter in a way that would try to really convince them that this was a good case. We were notified then in May of 2015 that the Chinese had decided to come to the United States, and we began to investigate or work on how that would work. So in preparing to work with the Chinese authorities, we had to work with logistics. What are they going to want to do? How do we work with them? What's the evidence we have? We collected over 1,000 pieces of evidence. The evidence was in Johnson County, as well as in Nevada, Iowa, as well as in Ames, Iowa, as well as along the route. So you saw the river, so it was kind of a lot of different things. The lab in Ankeny, the DCI lab, had done some of the testing. Dr. Nashelsky had done the autopsy here. So it's kind of like, how do we get this evidence and actually convey it to them? Plus, it's like there's a car, there's a suitcase, it's a biohazard actually at that point. What are we going to do? But we made the decision, and they made the decision they were coming. So how is it going to work for them to prosecute? Are we going to have to go over there? What is it? And another big issue we really had was trust. We haven't worked with these people. If we come over and we tell them everything about it, are they going to now tell him and his family so he has excuse and he comes up with alibis and then he comes back to the United States and our case is gutted? We just really didn't know what was going to happen. And to give you an example, when they finally arrived here, we were kind of not sure how it was going, and one of our investigators had been in the military police, and he told us we should lock up our cell phones, and we put them in our cars, and we didn't even have them in the room. We didn't work with them or initially meet with them at the police department. We met with them somewhere else because we were just, how's this going to go? By the end of that day, we were taking pictures of each other with the cell phones with the Chinese authorities, so we quickly got over that fear. But it was kind of like, if I turn over this evidence to them, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to prosecute them. Once it's out of the country, I'm not going to be able to show what we call a chain of custody to ever introduce this evidence into court here in the United States. So if I give this over to him, that really ends our chances of prosecution. And so, or it makes it much harder. So that was a concern. So Andy, fortunately, stepped up to help with a lot of the logistics, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy Rich now.
So in this short amount of time, it's not really going to do it justice, the amount of work that went into the logistics of getting the Chinese folks to the U.S. The U.S. Department of Justice was really instrumental in our communications with our Chinese visitors to make this all happen. We did find out that on May 13th, Mr. Li did surrender to the police in China. We didn't learn that until they were actually here because they didn't want to put that on email and tell us some other way other than in person. It was kind of a surprise to us. In June of 2015, the Chinese delegation came to Iowa City, as Janet said. The first day was a little bit rough, but as that week went on, I think we had 5 days to go over all of the evidence, talk about all the facts of the case, which those are some very long days and some very long evenings, but we did certainly find time to have dinner and get to know the folks that came over to the U.S. from China. We found out that a cop's heart is the same in China as it is here, and what we want is justice and to serve our people. There's a lot of photographs with dinner here in particular. These are a lot of the officers, prosecutors, and police officers that came over. This is a toast with all of us. I think it looks like all of us are there toasting to justice for Tong Shao. So we'll roll through these. The arrest of Mr. Li in China makes the news. That was a big deal, obviously, for China and Johnson County. We started preparing for a trip to China ourselves after we found out that Mr. Li was going to have a trial. That took the same amount of work. Once we found out that we were going to be invited to China, things moved very quickly. We had to get our own passports in order, get those to the Chinese consulate in Chicago to get our visas. They had to more or less check us out to make sure we could be in China. We received the invitation letter from the Chinese government. It's all in Chinese, but it's got our names on it. I don't know what it all says exactly, but it's interesting. This picture shows where WENZHOU is. It's a coastal city, and this is our flight path. It took us about 20 hours of flight time from Chicago O'Hare to ultimately end in WENZHOU. While we were in China, the hospitality was amazing. The Chinese delegation that we met here in Iowa, along with all of their counterparts and court people, it was amazing the reception that we got in China. Huge meals every night. It was very nice. It's just a quick picture of the city of WENZHOU. It was kind of cloudy and foggy our first day there, but things got much nicer. We were able to travel the countryside and see some of the beautiful countryside in that province in China. Detective Gonzalez doesn't handle his alcohol very well. So we made some very good friends in China while we were there, and we were invited to come back with our families and see China as a vacation and not so much work. So equally long days in WENZHOU, a lot of work to be done. Liz is going to talk about the court system and how the trial went.
I was assigned to the County Attorney pager during the last week of September 2014. And during the evening of September 26th, I received a buzz about 9 o'clock, and I called back to the Iowa City Police Department, and Sergeant Zach Dearson said, "Do you know the student who's been missing? I think we found her." And at that point, I immediately got Janet involved, and we went straight out to the scene, and we knew immediately when we arrived that she was in that car. And to think from September of 2014 to the fact that we would be in China in March of 2016 was something that I would have never imagined possible. I am not an expert in international law. I certainly haven't taken any classes, but I do know a little bit about the court system there and the trial that we observed that almost, according to the Department of Justice, no Americans have been invited to a murder trial in China that we were extended an invitation to. That was actually in the intermediate court. And that court handles crimes that are punishable by 20 years to death. This is a picture that I took of the courthouse that we were in. It's absolutely gorgeous. Their court is beautiful. Everyone there was extremely friendly and welcoming to us. We needed a ticket for the trial, which they provided. It was not open like our courts are here. No one could just walk in. Those are some shots from inside the courthouse. This is a picture of, there are two judges on the ends. There are some investigators in the middle there. The prosecutor of the criminal case in China is standing next to the female, and then Dave, Andy, and I are on the right. So a couple of differences that I'll just tell you right off the bat. We did have an interpreter in the trial with us. She was not able to speak as the trial was going on, so she had to actually write notes to us in English so that we could understand what was happening, because that would be considered to disrupt the trial if she was sitting there speaking, obviously. So this is a picture that we took from inside the courthouse, and this is from the perspective of the audience, which there were rows of benches, much like there are in Johnson County. The primary judge sits in the middle there, and then the member of the community who's considered a judge sits to his left, and a second judge sits to the right. To the left is the prosecution, to the right is the defense, and the chair in the middle is for the defendant, so he's not seated by his attorney or by anyone else in court. And there we are in the courthouse with our interpreter. A couple of the other differences that were immediately noticeable. were that the judges actually were familiar with the case before hearing any evidence. So they had had an opportunity to review everything before the trial even began, which is something that's very different from our system here. Another difference is that most of the evidence in the trial in China was actually presented through argument and not through witness testimony. So that's a huge difference from here. There was actually only one witness called, and that was by the defense. So the prosecution entered exhibits into evidence and spoke directly to the judges without actually calling any witnesses to testify. Here's a picture of us during a coffee break during the trial, actually with one of the judges. And that's another difference. We certainly wouldn't be allowed to speak to judges outside the presence of a defense attorney during trials here, but that was perfectly acceptable there. And these are photos from CNN. One other thing that was very interesting is that the civil trial and the criminal trial were actually combined on the same day because they felt like that was the best use of their resources. So we actually waited, Dave, Andy, and I were sitting in the trial waiting, as were all of the observers, while the civil trial was being negotiated outside of the courtroom by Tong Shao's family and the defendant's family. And once they arrived on a settlement with that case, then the criminal case started. Another CNN picture, and you can see the 3 prosecutors there on the left. You can see the 2 defense attorneys that were hired by his family. You can see he's seated in the middle there in between 2 armed guards. A couple of the primary issues that actually came up during the trial were whether or not the crime was premeditated. And that's something that Dave already touched on. And of course, it's our position that it was. That was an issue that was raised by the defense because the punishment for a crime that's premeditated in China would be significantly greater than a crime that wasn't premeditated. In addition, another issue that came up during the course of the trial was the foundation for the evidence that we had provided. The defense attorneys hired by his family actually argued that the United States reports generated by the Iowa City Police Department would not have any foundation and should not be admitted into evidence. That was something that ultimately the judges determined was not true, that the Chinese did not need to conduct their own investigation, and that they could accurately rely on evidence provided by the Iowa City Police Department. The trial lasted about 6 hours, and it was taken under advisement by the judges. We had lunch with the judges during the trial. They were very interested in our system. They were very friendly. They wanted to better understand the concept of plea bargaining because that's something that doesn't exist in China, which is something that we spent some time talking about with them. And it was an absolutely phenomenal experience, and we were very pleased with the outcome.
So I think this is a picture of them with the judges, the prosecutor, and actually we didn't go through, but the people who came here to the United States to do the investigation. We had one of the prosecutors who is actually in this picture, about the third from the left-hand side, and we had an investigator from the national level in China. We had 2 from the region of where WENZHOU is, investigators, and then we also had from the local level, including like the actual police officers who would be normally doing a homicide investigation. We had a translator here as well as somebody from the U.S. Embassy. And it's nice when they went to China, they got to meet up with those same investigators that they had met with, the prosecutor who had been here in Iowa City, who were handling the case over there. So already had that good relationship going too. So I think this is your last day. So everybody is having a good time in China before they left. So we were pleased when we found out sometime later. We actually had a press conference about the experience that they had in China, these 3 getting to go, and just, it was such a unique thing for the United States to ever do this. As Francis Chang told us from the U.S. Department of Justice, it was the first time we know of Americans ever, of them prosecuting a case and then actually inviting the American investigators and prosecutors to go there. But by the time the investigators had left here the year before, we felt like we were close friends with them. It actually was very nice for people to get back together with them. Then on, On June 22nd, we were informed that the court had ruled and that they had found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison for the premeditated murder of Tong Shao. That is the same sentence he would have been received had he been convicted here in Iowa of premeditated murder as well. That was one discussion I had with Francis Chang and included in my letter to the Chinese, which is that we do not have a death penalty in Iowa. It would be my preference that he would not receive something more severe in China, although I recognize that we didn't have control over the outcome. When they initially came back from China, they thought he might only get 20 years, which was a big concern to her family, to Tong Shao's family. They wanted to make sure he did they actually wanted the death penalty for him. But because he had turned himself in was maybe a mitigating factor that maybe led to him just getting life imprisonment. Or maybe they were actually trying to make sure he didn't get something worse than he would get in Iowa. So, as investigators and prosecutors, the most important thing in person in these kinds of cases is the victim. Tong Shao did not deserve to be killed at a young age. She did not deserve to be treated as she was. And we felt very satisfied that the person who we believe murdered her was found guilty and is going to be spending the rest of his life in prison. So we will always remember and never give up on Tong Shao. And so that's our presentation.
The first one is, did Tong Shao ever admit to the murder?
Actually, maybe you want to take this. Actually, it's Mr. Li. Tong Shao is the victim.
Right.
Mr. Do you want to take this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mr. Li was actually, we didn't know this either until the we had met with the Chinese here, but Mr. Li was actually interviewed 9 to 10 times by their prosecutor in China. And during the course of that, the initial story that we received here in the U.S. is that during the initial interrogation or interview, well, first of all, it was kind of funny, but anyways, in that regard, the Chinese, their humor is actually, they're pretty funny guys as we got to know them a little bit, but they basically told us 9 out of 10 people in China confess to what they did, and the other person who doesn't is, well, they end up dying. So it's one of those things. I'm like, holy cow! It's like that doesn't happen in the U.S. like ever, but so no. So it was kind of their thing, but they do get a very, very high rate of confessions there. So because obviously they're not held to they have just different laws that they have over there. So it was kind of a joke, but at the very end it was kind of true because they had said that the majority of the people they have there who they do interview, they do confess to what happens there. So in this particular case, initially they basically said Mr. Li reported to the prosecutor that he did in fact kill her, but she attacked him first in the hotel, and that's why he smothered her with a pillow at that point. Now that story would change as we proceed. Like again, that was the first time. He would be interviewed again 8 to 9 times, and by the 9th time, it would basically change that said that, yeah, in fact, he did murder her, and that's what they basically used at the time of trial. So it just kind of evolved that interview.
And Liz, maybe a couple of questions on, do you know what the settlement of the civil suit was?
It was equivalent to $308,000 US.
Sorry?
So the civil suit, it was equivalent to the U.S. dollars. It was 308 U.S. dollars. That's what it would equate to, basically.
308,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, 308,000. What did I say? $3?
Yeah.
It was more than that.
When were her parents notified after the body was found, and when were the remains returned to them?
As soon as we had, and this is in all the cases I've worked, along with the medical examiner's office, obviously with our pathologist as well, but as soon as we're able to identify whoever that person may be, our next step at that very moment is to go ahead and notify the family. And so in this particular case, because of the logistics, which I don't practice, obviously, I'd like to meet with people in person to be able to sit down with them and basically explain kind of what we know at this point. This particular case is a little bit different. So what we had to do in this particular case, we had to use the telephone in order to do this type of notification, let them know that, hey, in fact, we did have a positive ID. It is, in fact, your daughter. with the use of an interpreter as well. That was, I can tell you right now, it was very, very uncomfortable, to say the least. And almost to the point where it gets a little bit insensitive because you're on the telephone with somebody you can't see. So my number one thing to do when I went to China, and I explained this to the rest of the team, was I really, really, really wanted to meet her parents. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, because the way the court was set up, they're not even allowed to come into trial. So her parents weren't even there. So that's one of the goals that I never did achieve by being over there, is I never got a chance to sit down with her parents and basically tell them how important she was to us, having never even met her before, because of the way that phone call went and that notification went.
There's a question that I think I may know the answer to. Where would he have served had the trial been here in the U.S.? He would have been down in the fort, right? He would have been in Fort Madison, which is the state penitentiary for Iowa. There is an investigation question here, and that has to do with the hand weight. Would 20 pounds weight been enough to sink the body?
No, I believe it would not have been, unless he was counting on the weight of the body itself, the 25 pounds. But there was also another dumbbell that he would have inside the actual trunk itself that was not in the suitcase, but that was a 25-pound hand weight as well. So if you're combining both of them, along with the body and then the weight of the suitcase, maybe he was thinking that that would work. I don't think it would have. I think if it would gotten the current, it would just end up somewhere else at that point. But like I said, I think he probably thought it did. It would have worked.
It's a question having to do with the evidence, such as the car and things like that. I mean, what happens to that now?
So that's a very good question, because we had dealt with that. We had the car in our possession, and we've held on to that vehicle. And I try to revert to it as a vehicle, but really it is evidence. We try to hold on to that evidence just in case, because we do have an active warrant here. And like Janet said earlier, we are missing pieces of our evidence. It's very, very hard to present a case like that, and the chain of custody issue we're going to have should he get out of prison and come to the U.S. However, because we were going to get rid of that vehicle, and we can't hold on to that type of a vehicle, and so what we did is I contacted the family again and asked them if they wanted that vehicle. But now I already knew the answer. I did, but obviously we have rules and policies to follow as well. So I asked them if they wanted that vehicle back. I was given the answer no, they don't want anything to do with that vehicle. Not that we released it anyway. We told them about it because it is a biohazard. So what we're going to do at this point is what we did is we actually sold it to a metal. What they would do is they would basically clean it, crush it, and then they can sell off pieces of the metal. And what we did is we took that money that they paid to our department, and we donated it to charity, to different charities, just for that, in her honor. So.
Time for a couple more questions. One is, you had mentioned the victim's family could not be there. What about any press or media presence?
Absolutely. There were, CNN was there, as well as a handful of other reporters were allowed in the courtroom. It was very structured, though, and it was very formal in a way that we don't have here in Johnson County. They certainly had to be pre-approved, and no one was allowed in without a ticket. But yeah, the CNN pictures are from CNN. They were the only ones, the media were the only ones allowed to take or record anything in the courtroom during the trial.
Are no private citizens allowed in the courtroom?
Only by ticket. So if you would have applied for it and passed the screening and then received a ticket, you could be allowed in. What the process is to receive that, I don't know, but it didn't look easy.
Do any of the four of you have any other final comments or anything that you want to say? 'Cause if not, comes a time, of course, where we have the presentation of our coveted mugs. Andy?
Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Janet?
Thank you.
And Liz. And please, let's give a big round of applause for our presenters. And before adjourning, I want to make one more thank you to the University of Iowa's International Programs, University Honors Program, the Stanley UI Foundation for their generous financial support, and also today's special financial sponsors, Heidi Gaylor, Bridget, and Adam Ingersoll, and as well as City Channel 4. So Liz, Janet, David, and Andy, thank you very much for your time. And we're adjourned.